So in this video, I would like to talk a little bit about the reasons for why I, for example, personally hardly ever use built-in render engines inside my design programs. So in interior design, for example, it is SketchUp, and you can actually get render plugins also for SketchUp. But the problem is ultimately the render engines are limited to what SketchUp can only do. SketchUp is very easy to learn. That's its beauty. That's also its downfall. It cannot do much. And specifically for professional product presentation where you need more flexibility, you have to use something different. So there, for example, programs like Maya, 3D Max, Modo, Cinema 4D, Lightwave, and Blender actually have the upper hand because they of course are more complicated to learn since they can do more, and that's also the key difference and advantage. I can do more. And that's what I would like to illustrate here now in the session with Blender. So what we will do first is actually take a look at how we maybe can position some cameras so that, for example, we have a floor plan perspective view and maybe an orthographic view and an isometric view. So first, we have to set up our scene a little bit. So I have my world, my scene button clicked, and then I would like to go to Imperial. So all my values are now set to Imperial. Then I can go to here, click on the object properties, and now I would like to add a camera. I can go to Add Camera. And there it is. And you notice actually the camera is always positioned where, for example, my 3D cursor is, which you can set via the right mouse button. So maybe one way to prevent, before you add objects, accidental position of new objects, make sure that maybe with a right mouse button click, your 3D cursor is somewhere at the center of your scene, or you can press the N key to open the property panels and set the X, Y, and Z for the 3D cursor location to 0. So you see now it's centered at the world. Okay. So Shift A, camera, there it is. So as you can see, the camera got created based on how I look into my world, and that's not really what I want. So let's go to the object, then camera, let's say maybe we can call this one top, and I would maybe like to reset those rotation values. Okay, with the Z key we can switch between shaded and wireframe. There you see, there's my camera, I look straight down. Okay, so I would like to move the camera up, but before I continue this, let's slice actually our interface a little bit. So I go to this corner element, left mouse button click, and then I drag straight down. So you should see a horizontal cut. And here, for example, I do it. No, actually, what? Now we can do it. Then one more time. And yeah. So into this viewport, maybe I leave it for the moment, and then I can press Ctrl 0 with my mouse up here. I'm using a normal keyboard with my numpad. If you're on a laptop, you have to use the 0 on your above your letters, or you could go to View, Camera, and say Set Active Object as Camera. And there's my camera view. Okay, so we don't really see anything. And the main reason is pressing 1 to enter front view into this view here. You see the camera is below. So I have to move the camera up. And there are multiple ways. I can click, never click on the white ring because then you move Z and Y or X. I can click on the blue arrow and drag it up. And take a look there. Up there we can see actually how it moves up. Perfect. See, there we see it. Okay. You also see here inside transformation, we moved actually the camera up 32 feet. And there, we can just maybe clean it up, frame it. Okay. Let's create another camera. So maybe Shift A, or I go to Add Camera, and I would like an orthographic elevation view from here. Now the camera is rotated heavily, so 0 and 0 and 0. Let's take a look how the camera is rotated. So you see along the x-axis we have to rotate it up 90 degrees. So x 90. And then I have to rotate it 90 degrees so it looks to the wall. So I could type in 90 there. Or I could also in my 3D viewer press R, Z, and then move my mouse so it rotates to the wall, and the wall, not wall to wall. And you see here upper right, upper left corner, I see the amount of rotation. So it's positive 90. And I can type in 90 and enter. Okay. Here now, Control 0. And now I see my my space, but the camera is, well, it's on the ground plane, so I have to move it up. So for a natural look, maybe 6.2 feet for the z-axis is advisable, because that's kind of like where your eyes are. Okay. And this is perspective. Maybe we would like this to be an isometric, orthographic elevation view. So we go to the camera properties while having this camera selected. And here you see we can switch it to orthographic. Click. And let's go into wireframe. There you see perspective, 2D, perspective, 2D. If I move my camera up, it goes up and down. If I move my camera forward, backwards, doesn't really matter. Because now we have a scale function with which we can decide the scale. Pretty easy. Okay. So that's, for example, how we do some really basic camera movements. Let's make one more. For example, an isometric view. So this camera actually, because this is already set to orthographic, I keep. You can press S. Oh no, not S. Where's the icon actually? Okay, I can't. Never mind what I said, just ignore it. So what I'm going to do is with Shift D, with this camera selected, I move it to here, then I press R, Z and 45 minus. So you see now it looks 45 degree to there. Here, Control 0. Okay. G and Z. For example, now I can move it up. And now I would like actually the camera to rotate down. So there are multiple ways how we can do this. I can go back to the object properties. Here, for example, left mouse button, click and slide. And hold on, what's going on here? Oh, never mind. Everything works the way it should. So there it is. So I could, for example, type something in by hand, 45 or 60. I can left mouse button click, hold and drag the value. When I then press shift, you see I can go in smoother, finer steps. Maybe something like this. Maybe move the camera down a little bit there to frame my object. And I have to adjust the size or the scale of my design. So here I have to adjust my scale a little bit. There. Oh yeah, perfect. So Control 0, orthographic side view, Control 0, top view, isometric view. Very, very easy. And you see actually in one of my views here, I click my object and then I move my mouse back to the 3D view and then there press Control 0. Because otherwise you switch in each view to the camera view, which is not what I want. Okay, so that, for example, for the basic camera setups. So let's turn on some light. We're going to switch to Cycles Render Engine. And to make my life a little bit easier, I'm going to select all these cameras, go to Object, Move, and click on this layer. So all my cameras are put to a different layer so I don't see them, and I don't by accident click on them. Let's zoom in a little bit. Okay. Now, actually, I forgot one thing regarding the cameras. So let me go back actually. So my top camera, you see, actually perfectly frames my object. Let's go to a side camera, and it doesn't. So what I would like to show you is that each of your scenes, when you go to the camera icon and click on it, and all we need for the moment is actually this dimension. You see 800 by 800. That's the reason why 800 pixels by 800 pixels. So this is now 800. For example, now we got 1500. So why did this get smaller? Well, it's because it's a ratio of 1500 pixels wide, 800 down. So you see this way, for example, you can actually adjust the size a little bit. So we go to here. So there we can maybe make this a little bit taller. So why maybe is this important? Well, sometimes when the image is really big, you render stuff you might not necessarily need. So your rendering takes longer, or your image gets bigger, so you could pre-crop it. Or kind of like in this case, I set this one to 800 back, so it's basically even. I could also type in, for example, 200 by 200, the same ratio, or 1000 by 1000. So you see the amount of pixels don't necessarily matter, it's just their ratio. And then this one you want to be at 100. So when we render something out, the image really will be 100. This way we would make an image 50% of the scale. Okay, so this was really everything about the cameras. Let's go back to what I wanted to do, light stuff. Okay, so we can take a look at the rendering, and it's pretty black because, well, there's no light. So let's turn on the easiest light. We have world light, the environment. So we can go to the world, click new. In case you have something here, you can click on this X and then click new. And then here it says background, color. And maybe drag this one up till you kind of hit maybe 0.8 there. So this is basically an environmental light. And it actually shoots out light kind of like from a sphere that is wrapped around this environment. And you see it takes care of a little bit of shadowing in the corners, but otherwise there are no drop shadows or anything. It's a very flat and dull light. But you know, sometimes for certain render applications it's also okay, actually usable, because now the question is, do you want to explain the space visually nicely, or do you want to show that you can do photorealistic renderings? So, you know, photorealism is just an aesthetic. It's not necessarily a function, and good illumination and good like presentation, that's more a function. So we also have here, for example, the strength. So we can, for example, turn the light off or dim it, make it really dull, or make it stronger. Okay, so that's kind of like how environmental light works. So let's put in maybe a sunlight. So I put my cursor to here, above it, there, and then say add lamp, and let's use the sun. Okay, So the sun is very interesting because it doesn't really matter where the sun is. You see nothing really in my rendering actually here changes. So if I go into a top view, see it doesn't really matter. Because what's important is only kind of like this line that goes down. That actually decides from what direction the light is being shot into or flooded into the scene. So currently the light comes from the top down. You can even put the sunlight below my house. It doesn't really matter. The sunlight is basically simulating, well, our sun. So it's directional light. That means all light rays are parallel to each other. That means shadows don't really foreshorten perspectively. But I can rotate this light and take a look at what happens inside my 3D view. So also in top view, for example, I can rotate it. And you see, that's one of the reasons why very often I like working with different views. Because then I can easily move my mouse to the side view, move my mouse over the top view, and then easily just rotate by pressing R, my light direction. And I don't really have to care about maybe rotating along 3 axes, because in each orthographic view, you can only rotate around the axis you're looking at. So this is, for example, the y-axis, because I see z and x. This is the z-axis, because I see y and x. So, pretty awesome. There, maybe let's leave it at that. Okay, there's a little bit of grain. We can take care of this grain. The way how this works, instead of rendering 1 square and 1 square and 1 square and 1 square of each image, oh, I got another kudos, yay! We could, for example, simply render the whole image, and then step by step it's grainy and then gets cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. And you see here, I have something set to 1000, so it's running higher and higher and higher. And that is, for example, done by the samples. So if I, for example, sample it only one time, there, it renders one sample, one version, and stops. 2 versions, 3 versions, and you see with each sample, it gets a tick better. Maybe for test renderings, keep it at 100. Because otherwise your computer is constantly working and getting pretty hot. It's not really good, specifically when you have a laptop. Okay. So that's kind of like the basic stuff about like environmental light and sunlight. We can, for example, add maybe a point light, let's say here and there. And now, of course, the effect is really difficult to understand. So maybe our worlds we set to 0 and our sunlight we set strength-wise to 0. And there's our point light. And well, the point light emits light 360 degree, like as a circle, sphere. We can maybe set it to a spot. So there we see it. It's kind of like a light cone. Those are really good if, for example, you want to have some interesting light effects or illuminations on walls, kind of like recessed lightings, small beamers. And those currently are very basic light shapes. There's even one way to actually then use the actual illumination pattern from the actual light, and then this will look more, for example, like no, not IGES lights. Whoops. That was the wrong term. Here. There we see it. So here we see all the different light illumination patterns. So you can go to a light manufacturer and download those datas and then include that actually inside your rendering. And that, for example, kicks in ultimate realism for light. So for example, this looks pretty fantastic. This looks kind of meh. But again, you know, this goes back to start simple. At the beginning, really focus on explaining your story well. and we are using digital rendering simply in a basic form. So we're using some simplifications and shortcuts because that still can be, from a standpoint of illustration purpose, sufficient to make your object look pretty nice. Doesn't need to be realism. Then we also have, for example, area lights. Area lights means it is actually a light surface, so square, maybe 1 foot, maybe 20. So this is kind of like a light block. So let me rotate this one down and put it close to the ground. And there you kind of see there's actually a rectangular shape here, and that shoots out light against that wall. This, for example, could be used for, well, everything that has a rectangular shape, kind of like light boxes or such, TV screen, etc. There are also more options, but I would like to keep those for later and rather focus on maybe those elements we might use for our first initial renderings. So here let's go back to simple white and a sunlight. So let's add a little bit of material to the floor. Let's make a repeat on how to create materials. So I click my ground plane. See, it's selected, and then here this one I can set to the node editor. Go to materials, click new. I can do the same here, exactly the same button. Maybe call this one floor. Okay, perfect. Now I would like to have a texture being used for that color. So I can go to add texture, input, this image texture, and then I connect color to color, and then you see this magenta color, and that's a warning color. Basically means that we added an image texture to the color of this diffuse material, but well, we didn't really give it a texture yet. So I click this open button, and for example I downloaded like a tileable wood floor, and now it's yellowish. We don't really see much. Well, okay, now we have to tell the software how, for example, it should be projected onto this object. So what coordinate system it should use, and that's where we need this texture coordinates. So maybe let's select generated, or maybe object, and there we see the texture. But now maybe I would like to adjust the size, the scale, the rotation, the amount of tiling. So I need a mapping function. So I can go to add vector mapping and plug this one in. And then let's zoom in here a little bit. And for example, rotate 45 degrees. Ta-da. Now I rotated my floor. Very easy. And maybe the size is too small, so I can left mouse button, click, hold, and drag down to the Z, release my mouse button, and then type in 0.5. You see all three the values are adjusted at once. Really nice. 0.3. This is maybe a tick too big, so 0.4. Okay. And you see this is actually starting to look pretty nice. So wood very often is sealed with some sort of polyurethane or something. So we need a glossy function. So currently we just use a diffuse function, which means it's matte. There's no glossy or reflectivity on it. So we need to add a glossy shader. And let's drag this one in here. And now the whole floor looks like sandblasted aluminum. The thing is, you can only connect one line. You cannot connect both. So we have to mix these two together. So we need a mixer. And let's go to here, mixer there, and connect those two. Okay. Let's take a look at those values a little bit. So this factor decides 100% diffuse, 100% glossy, 0.5 means 50-50, 0.25 means 75% diffuse, 25% glossy, 0.1 means 90% diffuse, 10% glossy. And for example, let's set this roughness to 0, because that, for example, defines how smooth the reflection is. Now, the wood floor maybe should not look like plastic, but more like wood, so it has a little bit of structure to it somewhere. It's not like super polished. There's a little bit of shininess, but it's kind of blurry, so maybe 0.1 might help. Difficult to see that effect right now, so I disconnect this diffuse. Now I can see actually my reflection better, so 0.01. Now you see actually the reflection on this black material. The reflection is blurry, maybe 0.03. Yeah, okay, then I can reconnect my diffuse into the shader for the first mix input, and then I see that diffuse material mixed with this glossy one. So and this setup, for example, is very, very common actually for basically all materials, because you always deal with something that gives it some color, maybe a diffuse, and it has some reflectivity to it, so it's a glossy, and then we have to decide how do we mix these two visual properties together. And of course, glass, you use a glass shader. Wax, you use the wax-like shader, etc. But for what we're dealing with in architecture or interior design, pretty much that's all of it. If for example something should be chrome, obviously then we can just use the glossy material and just use a 0 roughness or a really small mini roughness, because it's not 100% polished. But we'll go into detail for that a little bit later. But I just said this simply to say that this type of material layout you see right now is pretty much the generic for most of the materials you ever need to be concerned about. And maybe let's throw in a little bit of bump mapping or structure to it. So I have a displacement. That means currently this floor, my geometry is really flat, and I would like this to look a little bit three-dimensional. And I can use this image here as a helper. But this is a color image. So first I would like to make this black and white. So I should press Shift A, go to convert RGB to black and white, and connect this. Let's plug this one in. And there we can see already kind of like the structure, but this effect is way too strong. Let's remove this one so we see this better. There, way too strong. So we have to tone this down. So I need to be able to influence the values that go into this place, and we can do this simply with Shift A, converter, math, drag this on, say multiply, and maybe 0.1. There we see now, there it is. It looks a little bit better. By the way, in case you have something like this, not a big deal. We can just by hand connect these lines. Works exactly the same way. Multiply 0.05. Yeah, okay, let's go back into the top view. And there, for example, here in the reflections, there you can nicely see there, hey, there's actually a wood grain. Pretty awesome. So let's put this color back. And maybe from this view, you might not necessarily see this very good from like an isometric view. So you will see this effect a little bit better. And for example, in case in this view it's not very noticeable, well then maybe we might have to just artificially pump up this value so you're going to see it better. So all these values are, how could I say that? You can approach rendering based on physical correctness, or you can approach rendering based on cheating and making illusions till it looks good. Okay, so Here actually from Chauffeur, pretty awesome store. They have really nice furniture examples. I added in actually just some goodies, 2 chairs, a concrete bench, and like a rack. Now I would like to go to my orthographic view. So shift click onto this layer, click on this camera, control 0. And now we have the problem that, yeah, I can look into my scene, but the front walls are totally blocking my view. So I could split up my scene into different walls, but then I add a lot of extra work. And this is, for example, another reason why I really like working in Blender. We can actually add a function. So we build some, like a volume that later will remove parts of this wall, but we do this interactively. Okay, so let's go to this layer first. Click this wall, go to the modifiers, click apply. Okay, perfect. And just forget what I just did. Let me check something. Yes, so those have to be outside. Okay, so in your case it should look like this anyway. Okay, so I press 7 in top view, right mouse button click, set my 3D cursor, press Shift A, add a cube, press 1, go to side view, maybe move this one down, then I go to edit mode, face select, press A, select this top one, and with this blue arrow, move it up. Okay. And then I click on this face, press E, drag it out. So the E is actually extrude, and this basically works like the push and pull in SketchUp. So E, drag it out, and there. Okay. So we would like to make this one transparent so we can look through. So I click on this object. First, let's call this one maybe section view. Then I can go to display and say wire. So now we can see through it. Let's press 0, Shift Z. But that silly cube blocks my view. Okay, let's go to ray visibility with this cube still selected. And then we can say the camera shouldn't see it. And it shouldn't be emitting any light, it shouldn't be showing up in reflections, no transmissions, no volume scatter, and also don't create any shadows. So now the geometry is technically speaking still there, it just doesn't affect the rendering at all. So, and that's really interesting because now we can select this wall, go to the wrench, to the modifier tab, click add modifier, boolean, difference, click on this one, type in section view, there it filters the name, really awesome when you have many objects. Click section view and look at that. How awesome is that? Now we can actually move this one up and down. So you see how you can adjust now, fine-tune perfectly the layout. So instead of making an adjustment, test render, making an adjustment, test render, making an adjustment, test render, I just turn on the render engine and do everything interactively this way. So much better. We can actually also maybe move this one a little bit to there. So with tab and tab, I enter and exit edit mode. Maybe till there. That looks kind of funny. Maybe till there. Well, maybe one looks stupid. So let's go back to there. No, you know, actually I didn't mind this way. So see, it's pretty nice. I'm currently moving the complete wall. I could even, for example, go to edge select, select an edge, and then just move this edge. So, there we have a nice cut section that way. Or maybe till there. Tick back. There. Well, doesn't look too bad either. So there are many ways how you can use this effect. Let's go back to face select, AA, and move it over, tab. Okay, let's show our furniture. And there it is. So let's say we, in this case now, would like to go into a top view. So here's my top view camera, control 0. And now my walls are cut out. And all I need to do is just go to the modifier, see, for this wall, and then just simply turn off. Don't show this up later in my final rendering, and don't show this one during my interactive real-time rendering. So you don't have to make multiple files with different wall configurations. You simply turn effects on and off, and this way configure and design your shots. Pretty awesome. And that's pretty much everything for today. Maybe the last thing to mention, just to make sure why actually we have kind of like the need to always type in an object here. So let's say actually I make a duplicate of this, maybe like this. And there, and whoops, that's not what I wanted. Wah, wah. Okay, let's click this object, Shift D, so it's a duplicate. Tab there, and maybe I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe I just do it this way. There. Let's move this one over. Okay, and move it back a tick there. Okay, so this object now, for example, I call maybe whatever, or I just call it cut section view 2. So, oh no, you know what we do? Here, let's delete this one. Let's do it this way. I make a new cube, bring this one over there, and edit mode, tab, you bring it over to there, you go over to there, and you go over to there. Okay, so it covers the wall. Then I have to do the same wire, zip, 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 zip. And let's call this one cut section view, let's say front. So, and then let's go into our orthographic front view because we don't see anything here. It's annoying. So we can go select the wall, modifiers, go to here. For example, type in, see, if I type in cut section, it filters out this one, or section view. You see those two section view objects are mentioned. And here, cut section view front. And show me it. So, and let's do a rendering. And there, I mean, how awesome is this? So, now obviously this is a little bit too tall. So now we can move this one down. That was the wrong one. I wanted to click this object here. So maybe even lower, 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 lower. Yeah, so not perfect. Orthographic elevation view, maybe tiny tick, not so good. Well, let's see actually if this might work, because I don't really see actually my floor. So maybe from a side view, rotate this a little bit, G and Z. Yeah. So, we're kind of like, it's a fake orthographic because I don't have perspective for shortening, but I'm showing a little bit of my floor plan, and you can see that these walls perfectly come towards me, but there's no perspective for shortening. So, I mean, this is not really a true elevation view because it's straight on. I show a little bit of a ground plane, but it's kind of like how you can maybe manipulate and play with those scenes a little bit. So, because with an orthographic view, maybe you can adjust left and right and height, but you can't really perceive depth necessarily really well, which is in generally difficult with an orthographic view. Like in case it's directly from the side, but maybe something like this could help. But now I changed my camera, not really good. So I'm actually stepping back with Control Z, Shift D, making a copy, press Escape, move this camera up, move my mouse to here, Control 0, and then I rotate my view till I'm back actually to what I saw before there. Because now I can easily click each camera, Control 0, and you see it jumps between those different positions. Pretty awesome, I think. That works really well. Okay, that's everything.